Hi guys, Brett Manning here again. I'm trustee of the New Aussie Constitution Trust. The New Aussie Constitution is a proposed replacement Australian Constitution. If you want to find out more about that, have a look at the first video in this series. I'll give you a bit of background. Today I'm going to give you a bit of an overview of what's included in the draft New Aussie Constitution. And this will probably have to be split over a couple of videos because there's quite a bit to get through. One of the big differences between the draft New Aussie Constitution and the current Australian Constitution, the current Constitution doesn't spell out exactly how the country operates. And so where the current Constitution is about 12,000 words, the draft New Aussie Constitution is about 46,000 words. So let's get into this. The first thing is that the New Aussie Constitution doesn't propose to change the name of the country. So it will still be the Commonwealth of Australia. There didn't seem to be a need to change it. It could be the Republic of Australia if we cease to become a monarchy, which is what is proposed under the New Aussie Constitution. But there didn't seem to be a need to change the name of the country. So one of the first sections in the New Aussie Constitution is the preamble. And the preamble sets a scene. It's basically a history of how we got to where we are today. One of the things that's embedded in the new preamble is a recognition of Australia's Indigenous past. In the Uluru Statement from the Heart, which the Indigenous community in Australia prepared some time back now, one of the objectives that they were looking for was that we speak the truth in any changes to the Constitution. And the preamble seeks to do that. The preamble also recognises all those Australians who've gone before and the contribution that they have made to the Australia we live in today. So as we move into the Constitution, it talks about the basis for government, that it is a democratic government with universal suffrage. It talks about our rights as Australian citizens. It also talks about the responsibility that we each owe to the country. At the time that the Constitution would be ratified and come into force, any laws that exist at that time will remain in place and operational, so nothing will change, unless those laws actually conflict with the new Constitution, and then they would be void. The Constitution provides a time for the government to be able to correct and amend these laws as required. Throughout the Constitution, there are various rights specified explicitly, unlike the current Constitution. There are about 25 of these explicit rights. Some of the examples of these rights are the right to enter and leave Australia, the right to basic education, the right to be secure against unreasonable search and seizure, the right to move and choose place of residence within the Commonwealth, the right to pursue a lawful livelihood, a right to innocence until proven guilty, a right to freedom of speech, right to freedom of association, freedom to petition the government. There are others as well, a bit too numerous to mention now. The draft New Aussie Constitution also has a series of Australian values. And while these don't form part of the law that is the Constitution, they do provide guidance. Now you could pick quite a range of values for Australia, but we've tried to focus in on the most important to our society. So the list includes mateship, a fair go, compassion, family, stewardship of the land, protection of life and freedom, growing to our personal potential, and the ownership of property. Each of these values is necessary for a successful society. Now, generally, the new Aussie Constitution tries to retain what works well for us. So we still have two houses of Parliament, a House of Representatives and the Senate. And of course, if you've been watching these videos, you'll know that we propose the head of state would be the Governor-General, but the Governor-General would be elected by the people. We maintain the state governments, and unlike the existing constitution, we also spell out the role of local government. The draft new Aussie Constitution requires all the office holders from the Governor-General down to swear an oath of allegiance to the Commonwealth of Australia and to the Australian citizens. The new Aussie Constitution retains 152 members of the House of Representatives and 76 senators. There are some slight differences to the way the members of the House of Representatives are elected, but not too major. There are some more significant changes, however, to the way senators are elected, and that's covered in the previous video, number 3. One of the other things that came out from the Uluru Statement from the Heart was that the Indigenous community wanted a voice to Parliament. This has been incorporated in the draft new Aussie Constitution. Under these new arrangements, there would be a Board of Indigenous Voice, which would consist of 9 elected board members, each representing a different regional area in Australia. These board members would be elected by Indigenous voters, and they would be employed under the same condition as Australian senators. Now, as the Board of Indigenous Voice, their responsibility is voice to Parliament, and so they would operate, as well as meetings of the board itself, they would also operate 2 standing committees. The first of those would allow the Board of Indigenous Voice to investigate matters that are of relevance to the Indigenous community. And it would operate like a normal Senate committee. It could call people to give evidence, and it can collect information in order to be able to provide advice to Parliament. The other standing committee would be the Committee for the National Indigenous Voice. This would be made up of the 9 board members and 3 government senators and 2 opposition senators. And they would meet at regular intervals to discuss matters of legislation that are passing through the Senate. The Board of Indigenous Voice can also obviously engage with the government directly on any new legislation that it might be proposing. Moving on, the draft talks about joint sittings of the Parliament, and this would be for very significant matters where both senators and members of the House of Representatives would meet together to vote on certain matters set out in the Constitution. Now, legislation would pass through the Parliament in much the same way that it does under the current Australian Constitution. So most legislation would be proposed in the lower house. When it passes the lower house, it's sent to the Senate, might be reviewed in the Senate by Senate committees, and then a decision will be made. If the legislation is then passed in the Senate, it then would then go to the Governor-General, the Governor-General's assent, and then it would become law. The Senate also had the ability to propose amendments and return the legislation to the lower house, which it can do on 2 separate occasions. And when the lower house votes on it, it can either be returned to the Senate if it's changed, or if the Senate amendments have been accepted, it would go straight to the Governor-General for assent. The only difference in this part of the operation is that ultimately the Senate can no longer block the legislation of the government. There are more details available on these changes in the 3rd video on the operation of the Senate. The new Aussie Constitution locks in the fact that there will only be one source of Australian law. Individuals can agree to a set of rules outside the Australian law. For example, if you're the member of a club, or you have certain religious beliefs that require you to behave in a certain manner, or you adhere to certain cultural beliefs that require you to behave in a certain way, Australians can choose to do that, but only for as long as they choose to be bound by those rules. The only laws that they must obey is Australian law. The new Aussie Constitution also makes changes to the way the banking sector operates. This will be the subject of another video because it's a little bit complicated, but largely it splits the banking sector into savings banks and merchant banks and keeps the 2 separate. And the aim of this is to put home ownership and home mortgages under the savings banks and put investments and other more risky things under the merchant banks. And this is to provide some protection from the rise and the fall of markets. The new Aussie Constitution focuses on government services being delivered only by one layer of government or one level of government. So it's either delivered by the Commonwealth, or it's delivered by the states, or it's delivered locally. In the next video, we'll look at the operation of the Commonwealth with the states and changes to the way Commonwealth states are funded. If you like this video and the concept of a new Aussie Constitution, then please like and share this video, and by all means click the notification button so you find out when we put out new videos. Thanks for your time.